Hello, everybody. It is Graham and Micah with Brother Telepathy. It is time. NFL draft is finally upon us. Micah and I obviously cannot be any more excited. In this video, we're going to be putting out our final mock draft. For this one, we actually partnered together. I know typically we go kind of one for one. We actually talked through this one beforehand, kind of compared notes, what we've seen online, what we think is going to happen, and we've come to a consensus on all 32 of these picks here. So we're going to go through one by one, of course, but we're going to be doing it kind of more of a joint mock versus kind of one after another like we've traditionally done. Of course, this is predictive, what we think is going to happen tomorrow, April 24th at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So we'll get that started here in just a second. Mike, you got any additional insight or thoughts before we get it rolling?
Yeah, it's draft season, baby. Officially draft season. Well, not draft season. It's draft time. We've surpassed draft season. It's draft time, and
it's the end of the season.
We're absolutely fired up. We're so excited for the draft. One thing I want to quickly mention before we start going through the draft: everyone's board. Every video you watch from tonight and tomorrow, leading up to the draft, especially people who aren't super into the draft community. This is what we put out, and what most draft analysts and experts put out is going to be, I would almost go ahead and say, completely wrong for what we're going to see tomorrow. So it's going to be a crazy first round. I've been doing this, and Graham's been doing this for years now. I think this is one of the most unpredictable, like most difficult to predict first rounds we will see in a long time. So I wanted to go ahead and preface that. But Graham, I'll let you start. This is your Titans here.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think because the boards are so different for teams, there's so many players in the same tier of there's only a couple of true elite players. We've talked about it, plenty of times here on the channel, but I'm in firm agreement with you there, Micah. We're going to start off here with Tennessee Titans number 1 overall. This is the only pick that is completely predictable at this point. It is going to be Cam Ward. Obviously, they canceled all the other private workouts. They've done the most work with Cam Ward. He's met the owner. It just makes so much sense for a myriad of reasons here. So a guy who, we've blown past this pick several times, and maybe I'm biased being a Titans fan, but Cam Ward might be one of the least talked about number 1 overall picks leading up to the draft in quite some time, just because it's been such a shoe-in, and people are talking about this quarterback class not being as strong. Cam Ward is worthy of being that first pick, and he's really, in my opinion, I think going to turn around the Tennessee Titans franchise for a few different reasons. So really excited about that, and I think that's going to be the only one that is for sure at this point.
Yeah, if anybody misses that pick on their predictive mock drafts, we have a problem. Yeah, Cam Ward, I think he's pretty solid arm as far as NFL caliber goes. Pretty solid arm strength as well. Nothing that'll blow you away in either of those categories, but I think his pocket presence and I think the off-field stuff, I think that this is someone who has the moxie and the makeup of a QB1, someone that you want being the head of your franchise. So for those reasons alone, just those two reasons, the pocket presence and the off-field stuff, how good you feel about him being your guy, is worthy of the number 1 pick. So I'm totally cool with that. Number 2 pick, just wanted to make sure we had it right here. Travis Hunter, no surprises here either. We don't need to beat a dead horse with Travis Hunter. It seems like he's been linked to the Browns pretty heavily. It also makes sense fit-wise. Not too much to say with that one.
Yeah. GM Andrew Berry compared him to Shohei Ohtani, so I think if you make that sort of comparison, he's probably your guy. And for the reason of that, he's just kind of a unicorn. And so I think it's a fair comparison from that standpoint. But either way, I think you make that statement pre-draft, that's probably a good tip of your hand at that point. But I could definitely see that. Number 3, again, we're not going to beat a dead horse here. It is going to be Abdul Carter going to the New York Football Giants here at number 3. They're saying Shedeur is still an option. The front office seems to be leaning more towards Shedeur, and the coaching staff, Brian Dable, seems to be leaning more against Shedeur. I really don't believe that. I think that there's really no way Shedeur's the pick here at 3 when you've got Abdul Carter on the board. So we're sticking with our guns here on this one, and that's our final prediction there.
Yeah, Abdul Carter, no surprise there either. We considered trade here maybe, but at the end of the day, it didn't really make sense for any of the partners and the compensation. So we just went ahead and stuck and picked with Abdul Carter there. So nothing crazy. And maybe Graham, you can kind of talk about this one because obviously Mike Vrabel being the new coach of the New England Patriots, we're gonna go Will Campbell here. I think that so far this top 4 has been pretty unsurprising. A lot of people in the draft community kind of have this as the order, and then Graham, you kind of elaborated that this feels like a Mike Vrabel type player, and it seems like the league as a whole is a lot higher on Will Campbell in the draft community. But I quite like Will Campbell, so you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think for a few of the similar reasons you pointed to with Cam Ward, maybe not for the exact same way, but Will Campbell just seems to have sort of that just like like I don't know, like edgy personality, and he just seems like a Mike Vrabel guy to me. There's obviously a huge need at really offensive line in general. Will Campbell, you can play at tackle. He probably will be decent at tackle. He could probably be a pretty good guard if you wanted to play him there. I think this pick is more going to be about establishing like a dominant personality presence sort of in that room, a young guy, kind of lead the culture and kind of how they want to be going forward is where I'm coming from on this standpoint.
I think a lot of the reason, also, I kind of just put it together in my head. A lot of the reason why the pros might be more high on him is because they have 4 years of tape on him in the SEC. So, like, maybe some of the questions that they have, they feel good about seeing 40 plus games of Will Campbell is enough to, like, hey, maybe we have our questions answered. We feel solid about him. So that's kind of just my quick thought on that. But you're here at 5.
Yeah, so we are up with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Been a lot of buzz recently about offensive weapon, Ashton Genty, maybe Tech McMillan. I thought at one point maybe Jalen Walker was in play here potentially. I think that the Jaguars are trying to do this. I think they're trying to create a lot of buzz about different players because I think they want to entice a trade up. And with that being said, we are going to predict a trade here. The team that's been linked to trade up in the top 10, most notably at this point that I've seen, is the Chicago Bears. We're going to have the Bears trading up from number 10, probably going to take one of those second-round picks at least to get up to number 5 with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to have the Bears trading up to take the one and only Ashton Genty once we get that pulled up here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to go Ashton Genty here, a guy that I think is, if you're taking a running back in the top 5, I think you're probably not going to find one that's a whole lot better than Ashton Genty, a guy that really doesn't have too many, if any at all, holes to his game. To me, easily best running back prospect that's come out since Saquon Barkley. Obviously, he went in a similar range to this, so I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think the Bears kind of find their ace with Ashton Genty back there.
Yeah, and we just talked about this before, actually, before we did the mock, but I try my best, and Graham tries his best as well, not to buy into, like, the late draft day hype of, like, especially 2 weeks before the draft, like, hey, this guy's really shooting up boards. Like, a lot of times it's smoke and mirrors. Graham and I agree that Ashton Genty hype is real. The train is real, and I think the top 5 hype is certainly there, which in this case we have the Bears making a move, and Ben Johnson it seemingly at least has a death grip on that front office and Ryan Poles. So he kind of makes the real decisions around there. Ryan Poles is kind of just like let's do it. Let's get offensive linemen. Let's trade up and get Ashton Genty. So this is Ben Johnson's doing, and I think that ultimately it works out in their favor because they get a blue player here. Pick 6, kind of went back and forth in this one a little bit as well. I think that Pete Carroll coming around wants to establish some of that offensive line help and bringing in Geno Smith. I think that maybe you're not in love with Tet here. I think the Tet slide could also be quite real. I think receiver slide as a whole is kind of what me and Graham have been thinking. But Armand Membo here at 6. The top 10 or so picks, top 6 or so picks, we kind of have a rough idea. And then after that, all hell breaks loose. But I'll let you take over here.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. And actually a point that you made that you brought up to me when we were doing kind of our pre-video work on this one, Pete Carroll's first draft choice when he came to Seattle was an offensive lineman. We know kind of these old school coaches definitely want to build through the trenches, which we've seen to be a very effective way to build a team. So I think Membo makes a ton of sense. There's nobody at that spot currently that's getting you away from taking Armand Membo number 6. So I think that's, this is definitely like a first GM Pete Carroll stepping in like type of pick. I think it just makes a ton of sense. So with you there. Number 7, New York Jets here. A lot of us are probably thinking, got to run to the podium. Mason Graham's here. Shocker, we're actually going a different direction. We're going to go Jahdae Barron, nickel cornerback out of Texas. A guy that's gotten a lot of buzz in the league overall. Guys like Daniel Jeremiah, others have him really high on their board. Just kind of like a Swiss Army type of player, and I think in particular this makes sense from an Aaron Glenn standpoint, wanting to get a guy who, again, Swiss Army knife in the secondary. Again, going back to Micah's original point, I don't think it's wise to make a mock draft in this year in particular where it's kind of following suit to a lot of what other insiders are saying, just because I don't think anybody really knows. So I think this is something that is, again, unforeseen at this point, but I do think it's logical. And so that's ultimately why we went with this choice here.
Yeah, and you kind of took all the words out of my mouth because I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, this is kind of like the first pick where it's like, whoa, what the heck? Like, Jahdae Barron over Mason Graham. Like, what in the world are you guys talking about? I think tomorrow we're going to see something, not this exact move necessarily, but something of this caliber where it's like, whoa, that guy was certainly not supposed to be above that guy, and, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, Jahdae Barron makes a ton of sense. Graham already mentioned the Aaron Glenn corner-to-corner links there, so not too much to say else, but you kind of hit it on the head there. Next pick, Carolina Panthers. I personally am a Walter Nolan guy, and I think that Graham brought it up to me. I actually forgot about this. Back in January, I had them going my favorite player in the class, Walter Nolan. We're not going to make that pick right now, but Walter Nolan might come around here soon. But either way, I think that Jalen Walker has been highly, highly linked to this team. The league is super high on him. High character individual, high motor. Swiss Army knife, kind of what Graham just said with Jahdae Barron, is also applicable to Jalen Walker here. So I've had a lot of the easy picks. Graham's had a lot of the fun ones here, but we'll get that going here soon. Switching up here soon.
Yeah, no, I'm not even going to say anything else. You took all the words out of my mouth there with Jalen Walker. I just think it makes the most sense. This is probably in the first few picks in a while, probably the one that is the most clear cut at this point. So definitely an option there. So next pick is the New Orleans Saints at number 9, and just checking my notes again. A guy that I think, again, is getting a lot of buzz right now, and I think that ultimately the Saints are probably going to go in this direction. We're going to go Micah Williams, edge rusher out of Georgia. So the Georgia Cats go back-to-back here. I was telling you, kind of making the correlation, similar measurables to that of like Cam Jordan, for instance. I think they want to find that replacement for Cam Jordan. I think we're going to see a run on D lineman early in the draft, and we'll see if that follows suits in our mock here. But that's kind of what I'm thinking here. Micah Williams, I think it makes a lot of sense. Set the edge as a run stopper, all that stuff we've talked about before.
Yeah, I am incredibly high on Micah Williams. I love the current play style he has. Like, he's definitely a run first type of player, but I think he has the potential, and the age is on his side to develop that pass rushing bag, and having someone like Cam Jordan there on the opposite side to kind of give him some pointers. Obviously, Cam Jordan is a shell of himself at this point, but mentally he's still got it. So Michael might pick up a few pointers there. And then right here, if this happens, Jaguars are probably winning the first round. Because they could have got somebody at 5, but they end up getting him the same player at 10. So Mason Graham, the fall stops, and we pick him up here at 10. And Jacksonville fans at first are thinking, no, trade back. And now they're thinking, that was the best decision our franchise has made all offseason. So that would be awesome if that happened for them. So it's kind of what we have going here. But, yeah, 49ers at 11.
Right. No, I'm with you. I think that would be pretty wild. But also, I don't know if it seems like a consensus in like the media that Mason Graham's like this can't miss player, but I think that there are some concerns. Doesn't have the longest arms, maybe is more seen as like a low ceiling guy. So we'll see if he slides. I could see him not sliding, but I think this is a viable outcome potentially. And again, there's going to be some shockers, so I wouldn't be surprised here. Number 11, we're going to go your boy here, Walter Nolan, interior D lineman out of Ole Miss. Again, a guy that you've been high on for a long time. I also was fond of, but just not as high as you were. But it's a guy that I think is going to go early. Again, we're seeing a run on D lineman here, and I think you're grabbing a guy who's got a ton of upside. It's even been quoted, he might have the most upside in this class. Who knows if he's quite at that level at this point, but I mean, he's definitely got a high motor. And again, you could talk more about Walter Nolan, but I think that this would make sense for a 49ers roster who needs some help in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I kind of think we teetered between that and offensive line. We kind of looked at our options, and given the fact that we've seen, in this case, 3, for all intents and purposes, D linemen, we're kind of calling Jalen Walker an edge there. But we've seen a run on D linemen. I think teams might start to look at it and be like, well, the offensive linemen are still there, but these edge players are kind of sliding. Let's go ahead and get our guy while we like him. So that's kind of the reasoning we landed on for Walter Nolan. Obviously, it's also a great player and a great fit. So all those things line up, and that's the selection that we made. Pick 12 here, a pick that I have made for, it feels like the last 5 mock drafts we've done, Ted McMillan. I don't necessarily, I think people are starting to undervalue him a little too much. Like the conversations around him have gotten a little too out of hand with him being, maybe not the greatest prospect of all these guys, but I think Ted in Dallas makes a ton of sense, and I think it would behoove them to make that selection. So you like that vocab word right there, Graham? I know you do.
Yeah, mom would be happy about that one.
Mom would be happy.
Yeah, so there's that one. Again, not going to say much there. I think this makes a ton of sense. They've been talking about getting a wide receiver 2 for a while. I think he's a good complement to CD. I think it makes sense. I think Matthew Golden certainly is in play too, but it's hard to predict who Jerry likes more. So I could see it either way. Here with the Miami Dolphins, again, a team that's been somewhat tricky to mock for, I feel like, because they've got some holes, but I think at this point it's pretty clear their biggest hole is going to be offensive line, especially with Teron Armstead retiring recently. They already needed offensive line. There is a guy that is talked about going higher than people probably think. That's going to be Kelvin Banks Jr., tackle, guard, however you see him at the next level from Texas. So I think this is a pretty straightforward pick, and I think one that makes a lot of sense in come draft night.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, Kelvin Banks is going to go higher than people are expecting. I think there's so many players who have kind of like fallen down boards and fallen up boards, or mock drafts, I should say. Kelvin Banks feels like one of those guys. But ultimately, we make that selection there. And real quick, I wanted to highlight, since I literally, before, when me and Graham, when we were talking about this, I literally said at pick 12, we had a conversation about a certain player there that I could feel like Jerry would want, donning the star is the words I said, and that's Tyler Warren. So back to that 12th pick real quick. I totally could see Tyler Warren being a selection there that would throw people off and be like, what in the world? So I just want to quickly mention that, since I forgot to mention it with my pick there. But speaking of Tyler Warren, kind of in that same vein, we wanted to do something fun here that was also within the realms of realism. And it just feels like, let's not overthink it too much. Like a guy who's widely considered as the top tight end in the class and a top 5-10 player, let's not overthink it too much. Let's just take Tyler Warren and move on.
Yeah, and also Shane Steichen, their head coach, also pretty much just flat out said they're looking for a pass-catching tight end at some point. So, I think you can connect the dots. It's been kind of the easy pick for a while, but I think it does make sense. So I'm with you there on this one. Next up, we've got the Atlanta Falcons here at number 15. So for me, it's been edge rusher all along. We're going to stick with that. We're going to go Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall. A guy that, again, that I've talked about at length, a guy that I'm really fond of as a player. We'll see if the Falcons are concerned with the character report and that sort of thing on him. But I think edge rusher makes sense. I think this is the range for Mike Green. I think he probably could go higher even, but we're going to stick with Mike Green here at number 15.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Edge is a huge need. It's been a need for so long for them. I know that a lot of people have said, like, hey, well, maybe they trust their young guys. I know last year they drafted Rook Ororo, however you say his name, out of Clemson. They drafted Brandon Dorless not long ago. They drafted Braylon Trice, who was someone I liked out of Washington. So they've had some D-line picks here and there, but when you have someone of Mike Green's caliber, like a consistent player on tape, as someone who's also a 15-plus sack guy last year in college football, I think you just take the best player there, and that's what Atlanta ultimately does with Mike Green. Pick 16, we kind of went back and forth on this one. Graham and I had some conversations. Ultimately, he said something that kind of tipped me off, and that was going offensive line here, particularly guard, and going Tyler Booker. Tyler Booker, top guard in the class, possibly the top offensive lineman in the class, depending on how much you weigh guards. But they go guard here. I know Will Johnson was a consideration as well, but ultimately we land on Tyler Booker.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a Will Johnson slide because of the medical concern. It seems like that's an issue. And as you mentioned, too, didn't really test all that well, didn't really test that much even, too. And that's a bit concerning, especially coming off of an injury. So I think he's in contention at this spot. But ultimately, I think Tyler Booker is a great fit for the Arizona Cardinals and what they want to do, and obviously fills a little bit of a need as well. So, pretty straightforward. Again, straightforward here for the Bengals. A guy that I'm pretty high on myself personally. I think he's my number 7 player in the class. Athletic freak of nature, edge rusher out of Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart. I think the range for him is going to be pretty wide because, he does have the the athletic makeup that you look for in an edge rusher, and we talked about in our draft guide, something that's really, really important, especially at edge rusher. But he doesn't have really any production either, and so you got to watch the film to see if you think you can get that out of the guy or not. But I think, again, with Trey Hendrickson potentially being on the move, I think this would make a ton of sense either way, but especially if he is, again, eventually on the move for them.
Yeah, and I think that this feels like the right range for Shamar Stewart for me, and I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, is obviously the physicals, the intangibles line up with that of Myles Garrett, who's going to be an all-time player, defensive player of the year type guy, number 1 overall pick, but doesn't have the production to match that. So I think if you're the Bengals, you're like, hey, can we get a modicum of what Myles Garrett is at 17? Like, even if he's a fraction of the player he is, I think that is a great place to be in. So that makes sense. I think Shamar Stewart's probably in that 15 to 20 range, and ultimately have him going at 17. Pick 18. This is one that I have thrown out there before, and I love the idea of it. And this is, again, one of those picks where it's like, I don't really see there's bigger needs. Like, why not? Colston Loveland. I think that the tight ends, I think both tight ends go in the top 20. Obviously, who knows where, but I think that the Colts getting Tyler Warren and the Seahawks getting someone like Colston Loveland, who's a little bit more vertical, especially when you have like someone like Sam Darnold back there. You kind of have Jackson Smith and Jigba to kind of operate the close range, the slots, and Colston Loveland can kind of work those seams, and that's what you want in this type of offense, and it matches up nicely with what they want to do with Sam Darnold at the helm.
Yeah, beautiful analysis. I agree with the Clint Kubiak offense there coming from San Francisco. I think getting a big pass-catching tight end would make so much sense. I love this pairing when we did it in one of our other mock draft videos. I think this is the type of pick you're going to see at some point. Again, it's like we've never even imagined this at this spot, but I think the stars could align here on this one. So I'm in love with that pick. Here at 19, again, another position that we've talked about for the Bucs would be edge rusher. Again, it's not a surprise in a deep class like this. Giod Campbell certainly is on the radar for the Bucs. It seems like they really like him, but the medical seems to be a concern for teams. His shoulder seems to be just completely out of whack. So it seems like he may not even be ready for training camp. With that in mind, we are going to go Donovan Ezraku, edge rusher out of Boston College. I mentioned it before. Maybe the best bend I've ever seen out of an edge rusher. He gets literally parallel to the ground. A guy that's had a lot of production, flip side of Shamar Stewart. I think that's something that they could certainly value at the Bucs. And again, just a really great player at the spot. So I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think outside of, and even maybe including Abdul Carter, I think Donovan Ezraku is the most pro-ready. I think that he's like the most plug-and-play type guy as far as the edge group goes. And I think that's something that the Bucs need is just some consistency on the edge. And ultimately, that's what Ezraku is. So that's why we made that pick. Pick 20 here with the Broncos. Again, not going to overthink this one too much. We have seen Amarion Hampton be mocked higher. We've seen him mocked lower. But the Broncos, because Ashton Genty's typically gone by this point, we see them take Amarion Hampton very often. And I think that ultimately that's what we end up doing again here. Great player. Bowling ball with a jetpack is how people have kind of comped him. So in that Sean Payton offense, I think that having a running back is pretty important. They've kind of always had in his tenure, like the Mark Ingram type players. Amarion Hampton has a little bit more juice than someone like Mark Ingram, but kind of that same mold. So Amarion Hampton's the pick.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. I think he's certainly a guy that's going to go round one. We talked about it before, a guy that would be pretty highly touted if it wasn't for Ashton Genty there as well. On to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kind of what people were saying for a long time being like the floor for Shedeur Sanders. I don't see that. First of all, it's his floor. Second off, I was telling Micah, pre-recording this video, I just can't shake this notion that I don't think the Steelers are going to take a quarterback. And I know you've kind of, we're in agreement with me on this one as well. But I just really don't see them taking a quarterback. And it's like, you made a good point. It's up in the air with Aaron Rodgers, but I think he probably ultimately does go there. And I just don't see them taking one at this spot. Now, they don't have a second-round pick, and I think that does play an important factor. I think like a Tyler Shuck is a good fit for them. But without that second-round pick, it might be tough to get the guy that they really like. So ultimately, we're going to have them passing on a quarterback, although I wouldn't be surprised if they did take one. I just can't shake that feeling for some reason. So With that being said, they're just going to go really good player here, a guy that's slid a little bit, again, due to medical, like we talked about. Go Jihad Campbell. Again, maybe not like their biggest need in the world, but just a really good player. I could see Mike Tomlin valuing a guy like that at this spot, even with a little bit of injury concerns. So I think that's where ultimately we're going to go with this one.
Yeah, Jihad Campbell can rush the passer a little bit too. So we kind of mentioned before that edge and just pass rusher in general was something that they needed. So Jihad Campbell, depending on what you want from him, you might be able to do a few of those things. So also one of my favorite players in the class. So can't be too mad about that. But also, as you did mention, quarterback. We feel the same way about quarterbacks for the viewers who haven't seen the video or anything or our content. Shador is not someone we're super high on. And for the Steelers, the line for him today for where he's going to be drafted switched from 9.5 to 21.5. So there's a huge jump even just today in the discourse surrounding Shador Sanders and where he ends up. 21.5 being the Steelers pick. So could he go here? Maybe. We don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. For all we know, he could come out tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and say, I'm a Steeler, and then that changes things. So we don't really know. But I do think Jihad Campbell here is a good pick, and we're going to stick with it. Graham, also, speaking of you kind of tipped me off on this pick, and I absolutely love it, especially considering both the tight ends are gone. I know that Harbaugh would love to get his boy Colson Loveland here, so he's going to have to settle for the other Wolverine here in Kenneth Grant. Defensive line, position of need. A lot of people have said receiver, tight end. Obviously, the receivers are still here, but maybe in this case, they value the defensive line a little bit more. I know Harbaugh loves his trenches, so we're going to beef up the trenches a little bit more on the defensive side with a familiar face.
Yeah, I agree. It makes complete sense. I mean, again, it's a Michigan guy. They need interior defensive line. Is a great player. I think, again, I'll use the phrase, all the stars are kind of aligning on this one here. So I think that makes a ton of sense. Here at 23, the slide's gone too far. Another guy that has slid due to medical concern and a guy that didn't really test that well when he did test. Also, again, didn't really test that much in general, but just a really great player is going to be Will Johnson, next Michigan cat off the board here, back to back. A position of need, corner with Jair Alexander, more than likely being on the move at some point, whether it's this year or not. A cut candidate even potentially. So, Will Johnson makes a ton of sense. Again, just a good player who's fallen a little bit too far. But again, it is a little bit concerning with the not that impressive 40 time, not testing that much, coming off of an injury. It's a little concerning. So I think this is the range for a guy like that. Coming off of concern, Caleb Farley a few years ago was one of the highest rated players that year, but fell to 22 or 23 to the Titans of that year. So it's a range for a good player that's got some injury concerns who didn't test all that well.
That's a great comparison there. And I would be kicking myself as a Vikings fan because I think Will Johnson, when the tape is there and he's healthy, phenomenal player. I mean, like, instincts are really great. Maybe not the best with the ball in the air, but I think his instincts and his technique kind of make up for that. And he's just a super sound player. My number, I want to say 7 player on my big board. Obviously, considering the health, he's a little bit lower than what I have him. But yeah, pick 24 here. This is we figured we'd spice up a little bit. Like, we want to stay within the realm of realism, but we also kind of want to have some fun and because I know, like I said at the beginning of the video, what we put out is not going to happen, and just like your other favorite analyst, whatever he puts out is not going to happen. So we might as well have some fun with it, and something that could definitely happen, and we want to make sure that it makes sense logically as well, not just do fun stuff for the sake of it, is another trade here. Vikings, my team, obviously, having these 4 picks is not something that they typically do. Is they typically walk away from the draft with a lot more picks. Obviously, the Kwesi regime is kind of more content with sticking around that 6 to 7 pick range. But I think we need more in that 24 to 97 range. So I think trade back makes a ton of sense. The question is, who is the partner? We're gonna go with the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. And I don't know what the compensation is. It's probably going to be some BS like this, so just bear with us. We'll take that. Question is, what player? And I only see one G up there, and that stands for Georgia, so that's going to be the Howie pick. And I think that every draft and every free agency move, it feels like Howie just somehow made it happen. And Malachi Starks being the best safety, probably a top 10 player, position of value, people don't really consider. He falls, Howie makes a move and strikes. Makes sense for both parties. they're just keeping the Georgia trend alive, and they obviously get one of the better players in the class at 24.
Yeah, again, I think when you're trying to make predictions like this, you have to connect dots in some ways. Vikings only have 4 picks. They're usually a team that has more picks than that. Howie's not afraid to make a move like this for a player that he wants. It's a Georgia player. It's kind of a joke, but at the same time, like, it's not.
That's very well said. It's kind of a joke, but it's not. Like,
Yeah, and then also they did let go of C.J. Gardner-Johnson recently, traded him to the Texans. So again, these dots are connecting in a way where I think it's viable. Is it definitely going to happen? Probably not, but it's a viable situation, I would say, in this case. Moving on to the Houston Texans, I think the need is too great. You do often want to draft best player available, but I think the need is too great. Josh Simmons arguably could have been offensive tackle 1 anyways. I know he is for you, but with the injury, that sort of thing, I think it makes sense for him to be at this spot. But that's where we're going to go here for the Houston Texans. I think adding offensive line makes the most sense.
yeah, not going to beat around the bush too much. CJ Stroud gets his Ohio State teammate back, protecting his left side. So Josh Simmons the pick. Graham already mentioned he's my OT1, so we're not going to worry too much about that. Pick 26. This one is interesting. We had some corners here that we had to pick from, and we kind of wanted to line up like who of these teams showed interest in, who do we think is going to go in these spots, and ultimately we narrowed it down to corner depending on which one. We ultimately landed on Maxwell Harrison, interception artist. This is a guy when the ball is in the air, more times than not it feels like it's his. Obviously out of the University of Kentucky, so great player there. Maxwell Harrison's the pick.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. He did a lot for himself at the combine with his testing ability, and we've talked about it. Corners of need for them at this point, probably one of their only few needs. So I think it just lines up on this one too. And then again, we got to go with draft philosophy a little bit here. Baltimore Ravens, they always typically go best player available. At this point, best player available is going to be edge rusher James Pierce because there is a little bit of a need there too with getting some more juice to their pass rushing department. So a guy who's fallen a little bit in terms of like the talent that he has and the production, all that stuff, just because of the off the field issues. In this situation, you think that the Ravens probably are okay with that at this point, and just take a good player and at a position of need too. So
yeah, they're going to be picking at the 26 to 32 range next year, so might as well just pick someone who we think has the highest upside. That's James Pierce. So not too much to elaborate on there.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, Detroit Lions picking here. We could have went a few different ways with this one. With the news of the Jameson Williams Jameson Williams? Okay, yeah,
Jameson
I don't know
Williams,
why.
yeah, you got it.
I don't know why all of a sudden I double checked myself on that. But Jameson Williams, there's some questions there. The depth in the wide receiver room is pretty bad. They had some health concerns across their entire defense, but specifically in that front 7 last year. So maybe defensive line is a pick here. But I think ultimately we landed on the probably the best player available at the spot, and that's Matthew Golden. I know certainly for you, he's a really high player on your board. Someone who lit up the combine, obviously 4.29 speed. So I think Detroit Lions do something a little bit maybe not in a super high consideration, especially given the fall of the receivers. But the stars align, and Matthew Golden ends up a Lion.
Yeah, exactly. I think, again, it's another situation where just getting a player like this. And honestly, the Lions, they don't always go with the consensus pick. Brad, I said Brad Holmes. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
He likes to go with the guy that they find their affinity for certain guys and then go for them. And again, they kind of just say, screw the big board, whatever it is. They go for their guys, and I could just see it being this way. So on to the Washington Commanders here. Again, we talked about maybe Travion Henderson going here, running back out of Ohio State. There's been some buzz for him going in the end of the first round recently. There's been some buzz for potentially a trade up from like the Giants coming back into the first round to get a quarterback. We're not going to go with that scenario in this mock draft here. We're going to have them sticking and picking Derek Harmon out of Oregon, a guy that's, a really good player, a guy that I'm fond of. Falling a little bit too far. Again, sounds like medical. There's some concerns there. But I think at this point, the value is too good to pass up on a guy like that. They did bolster their interior defensive line a good bit in free agency, but you and I are not really moved by the moves that they made in free agency. So I think that would not shy them away from taking a guy like this. Dan Quinn, Trench's guy, again, another kind of old school head coach, defensive minded guy. So I think this would make sense for them for sure.
Yeah, definitely makes a ton of sense there. Buffalo Bills here on the clock. Receiver here was a consideration just because there's a lot of great guys left, but I think corner is, again, position of need, and they've been heavily linked to Trey Amos. I've seen a ton of buzz around him being there. The fit makes sense. We're not going to belabor it too much. The fit makes sense, and they've been linked together, so we're going to go Trey Amos.
Yeah, we're not going to belabor this next pick either for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think offensive line makes the most sense. Probably going to be more offensive linemen drafted than we are thinking about currently. We're going to go Josh Connolly Jr., tackle out of Oregon, a guy who's got position versatility, which is something we've talked about being pretty important. I think he is a tackle ultimately, but you could stick him at guard if you need to. Kind of their longer-term solution at guard, hopefully. So I think this would be a good pick for them for sure.
Yeah. I love the pick there, and it makes a ton of sense. It's the biggest need when you have 15 playing quarterback. So taking tackle there, it just is the move to make. Pick 32 here. Vikings obviously trade back with Philly for the 24 spot. So Vikings have been a team that, as it says listed, is DBs a heavily consideration. I know Nick Eamon-Warrior has been a pick that a lot of people have had here. I'm not a super big fan of the pick. I love Nick Eamon-Warrior, but I don't think for the Vikings it makes sense. Interior defensive line is another consideration. We need an interior defensive line. But I think corner is the primary spot. And I think if you wait on corner in this draft, you're going to miss out on a lot of players, because I think especially after the inevitable player that we're going to take in Benjamin Morrison, I'm not really moved all that much by the rest of these guys. I'm higher on Morrison than the consensus. I think the league is going to be higher on Morrison than the consensus. He's going to be the final pick of our first round. And our final mock draft of the season. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we have right here. So super excited for the draft. Graham, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, the culmination of the work that we put in and the what we've seen in the media and all that stuff. This is what we think is going to happen. It'll be fun to see how wrong we are, like you mentioned there, Micah. But it's
because it'll happen. It'll happen.
Yeah, it's always fun to do this and look back and see fit and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all we got. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always. We'll be coming out with some post-draft content, kind of grading picks and overall draft hauls and all that good stuff. So really appreciate your engagement as always. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Peace out.